cultic leader can take advantage of the situation and just arise, not just because people want them, but because the person is taking advantage of the power gap. But then also at the same time, once the cultic leader or the charismatic leader leaves, then a power gap is open where anyone can jump at it. So anyone literally can just come and fill that gap. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Africa Asia podcast, the Africa We Want. Our podcast covers various issues, and one of the issues that we've been covering lately has been on leadership and various observations on Africa leadership. Of course, this is mainly to give some thought and some ideas and to give maybe concepts that people should consider when it comes to leadership within Africa. And the aim is to shape policy, to influence proper leadership or offer suggestions and improvements where necessary. But then also it's also to start a conversation about this issue. So tonight we have as our guests who have been here before, we have Prosper Zimbili and Chris Mobe. Both have been covering various topics. The last discussion we had with Prosper is what we want to follow up on, and you can watch it on our YouTube channel. It's about cult leadership within Africa, and this is in regards to what you observed, that most of the leadership or politics within Africa is not idea based, it's not ideology based, it's not concept based, it's largely, like organized around personalities. And so tonight we'll be speaking about cult personality sort of leadership and the power vacuum, the effect of the power vacuum it creates after the charismatic leader has passed on or has been overthrown. So just to give a perspective of what cult personality is, where it is organized either mass media propaganda or where someone is presented with as a certain charismatic leader who has certain qualities and who people should view either as supernatural or as a hero and someone whose power and authority should be taken and questioned. And the effect of that is that you have undevoted, unquestioned leadership of this person. So people will just do anything that this person says because already from the idea that has been sold to them is that this is almost like a superhero or someone that you should listen to without questioning them. And this could be in form of leadership or religious cults or however, whichever form it takes. But tonight we'll be focusing on leadership. So Prosper, I'll go with you first to give a sort of perspective on what I just defined and also in the concept of Africa. Any observations that you've made where this arises, especially with regards to leadership? Prosper?
Thank you, Christine. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to be here. It always is a pleasure. So last time, like Christine said, we spoke about the lack of ideology in African politics, chaotic leadership. Now, just to briefly summarize it quickly, I'll give illustrations. But before I do that, the one thing that we noted was that this isn't just about politics of state government. It's about institutional politics all over Africa. You just don't see this in state institutions or political parties, but you see this in churches, you see this in maybe extended families. So you see this whole prophet phenomenon, grand pastors phenomenon, to the extent you find church leaders taking each other to court, especially in Zimbabwe. We had various churches over the last 5 years taking each other to court after probably the cultic so to speak, leader dies, because basically that church was regarded as that person's personal property, and there was no clear succession plan. There wasn't anything that can really hold an institution together. And then you have factions, and then you have people fighting, people take each other to court. And this is basically the same thing that we see with political parties. We've seen this with Zimbabwe's ruling parties, and here with Robert Mugabe being there since 1980. When he was prime minister, 1987, executive president, to right around about 2017. So somewhere around 2014, factionalism grew, and it grew large in Zimbabwe because he was ever there. Robin Mugabe was a larger than life character. So there was no clear succession plan. And factions arise, they start to fight each other, they start to, things like that. The same thing has happened with the biggest opposition political party in Zimbabwe, the MDC. It has split into more than 13 groups in 22 years. So something like that. But this is what we were discussing. Institutions don't become institutions anymore. They are owned. They become sort of private property of individuals. They become something more than even intellectual property of individuals. So this was basically it, and we're going to be building on from there. Thank you.
Okay, Prosper, thanks a lot. And yes, that puts things into perspective. Building on what Prosper has just said, it's the perspective of having a leader who is almost taken to be like they will forever exist within that scenario. So there's no succession planning. It's almost like it's viewed as if they will exist in perpetuity. There's lack of organized plan on what's going to happen when this leader leaves. And I think various things that often happen in such a scenario is that the person gets this loyalty from people that they may not even want to have any successor or entertain the thought that there may be someone who may come after them and succeed them. A past discussion we've had here has been about the role that religious practices across Africa have in these kinds of things, especially when you hear people say that leaders are appointed by God and it's the will of God a certain person remains in power in perpetuity. This is a common thing that happens. And Prosper, I would like to hear what your thoughts are on that, because I think even as you say within institutions, that there is that kind of thing. But then I think there's a driving force behind it. First, there's this, like the belief I just said, where someone says, I mean, you just accept the person who is a leader because you know it's God's will. So, and what can you do about it? But then also, I would like to hear what your perspective would be about what changes could be made, especially as you say, because even other state departments have this sort of influence, and it's almost like it's the same game that goes on as the cultic leader of the state. It has that kind of power even within the other state departments. They seem to have the same kind of power. So what do you think would be the changes that would be made, and also like your comment on that perspective that people seem to have, that leaders are appointed for you and you just should bow to them and take them as they are?
Yeah, I think like basically changing a system isn't something that can be done as easily as we would want to. But ideally, I think one thing that can help to strengthen institutions, really, institutions cannot be strengthened, especially state institutions, cannot be strengthened without civic education. And the one thing I think that lacks in Africa in general, I think the vast majority of African states do not have robust civic education systems. They don't have robust civic education plans. In that regard, then like basically reinforces the average citizen's apathy in state issues. I think the reason why people often find it easy to follow a chaotic leader and just believe in anything and everything that they say is because they don't have incentive, and neither do they have enough and adequate information and tools to engage in state issues. They don't think they can make decisions for themselves, and they have to be made for them. I think the only decision that most Africans believe they can make is voting. But voting happens once in 4 or 5 years, depending on which country you are, 3, 4, 5 years even. Over here in Zimbabwe, we vote once every 5 years. So that's the only civic duty that Africans know that they should perform and that they perform is voting. But to be honest, they don't even do it so well. Most countries do not have impressive voter turnout. Of course, recently we started to have impressive voter turnout, but generally Africans don't vote that overwhelming. But even if they didn't, that basically was the only civic duty that they seemed to be willing to want to check on. But other than that, they don't. No one wants to call leaders to account. No one wants to take stock of what the leaders that they voted for are doing between this election and the next one. No one knows where to access public information. No one knows how to interact with the country's legislators. No one knows how to interact with the country's judiciary. Basically, almost everywhere over Africa, people think that these are elite things. They think it's elitist to engage in civic activities. And I think that's the one thing that is basically really wrong. There are a lot of things that can be done, but I think the foundation is to strengthen civic education, is to strengthen participation in civic duties from citizens. Once citizens know that we should participate in the governance of our country, once citizens know that they actually have the potence to bring their leaders to account, to give checks and balances to their leadership, it becomes easy for them to start thinking for themselves. What is it that we want as a society? What ideas do we have? How do we fuse them together? How can our leaders best serve us? But when citizens don't know that they have the potential to do that, or when they actually don't know how to even do it, then they can't do it. The best that they can do in the circumstances is to wait for an individual who obviously charismatic people are more often than not demagogues, and they use more populist rhetoric than anyone else. Who's going to come and feign identification with them, that he identifies with them, and who's going to say, well, since I identify with you, I can do A, B, C for you, and then not do it at the end of the day. So I think the biggest thing that can be done to then deal with such a situation is to strengthen institutions, but they can only be strengthened by more citizen participation between elections. It's not just about voting. It's about what happens between this election in which you voted and the next one. How are you going to interact with the lawmakers of your country? How are you going to interact with the ministers of your country? How are you going to interact with the magistrates, the judges of your country? Those things are important. So I think when that happens, it could work. It's a process, but it works.
Okay, Prosper, thanks a lot. Chris, about this whole discussion of personality cults and observations that you've made across Africa and leadership in general. So if you could just speak to it.
So my take on this is from the get-go, we see various people. Once they come in, most of them come in on a populist agenda. So probably people have been through some terrible time period, probably dictators or people who came in as Democrats and became dictators. You see the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, Milton Obote, and then people who come in and replace them come in. They're very popular by there at the onset when they come in. And I think that helps to build that cult personality around them because, quote unquote, they're taken as a saviors. So you see across the border from here, we have somebody who's been in power since the 80s. And before him, there was a general who came in and he was very popular. We see down south in Zimbabwe, probably the late Mugabe also fought for independence and such kind of things. But now once they come in, they end up, for lack of a better term, surviving on the goodwill and the liking of people. They end up building what should be state structures and systems around them. And at some point, people also get tired of them. But at that point in time, it's too late because they have structured everything around them, basically. So it's not that, my thinking is it's not that in the basic terms, it's not that people actually super like them in the cultic relationship with them. It's just that people can no longer do anything because this guy has structured everything around them. And I think that is what prolongs their time period in power until somebody stronger with more charisma or maybe the military with the arms and weapons are able to remove them. So that's my simplest understanding of this kind of leadership and what goes on around them.
Thanks, Chris, for that. And I think an observation then to make from what you're saying is that first, a cultic leader can take advantage of the situation and just arise, not just because people want them, but because the person is taking advantage of the power gap. But then also at the same time, once the cultic leader or the charismatic leader leaves, then a power gap is open where anyone can jump at it. So anyone literally can just come and fill that gap. So it's on both ends that it's either at the beginning, someone just comes and promises all these changes, and at the end, someone else is offering the same thing, but there's no change because they're the same kind of leader, like as the previous one was. So over time, so it's this something that is just, it's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. And Chris, I think also the same question that I'd asked Prosper, what would you suggest as some of the solutions that there could be to address this kind of thing? If you ask me, like from what Prosper had said, it's one, especially that there should be an ideology that is not changing based on a leader. So like we've discussed this in the You find there are countries which have like a 5-year development plan or maybe a 20-year development plan. This is what we are doing. Whether a leader comes or a leader goes, we are sticking to a certain script by which we will develop, by which we will move forward, by which we strengthen these kinds of institutions. But then also the other thing, because the other thing that happens is that with each leader, there's a new style, there's a new focus. And with each new leader, there's erosion of what the previous leader did. So if you, that's first thing that comes to my mind, that's one of the ways to look at it and make sure that there is an ongoing plan which is not dependent on a leader, or there should be an ideology that's clear. We know when this side of the politics is in power, this is what we expect of them. When this other side is in power, this is what we expect of them. But with nothing where someone is the one who comes and defines every time, then it becomes a problem. But Chris, what are your thoughts on like some solutions that there could be for this?
For me, I think, and I might be wrong, but I think the people are to blame in this sense. We fail at the ballot. That is if you're given an opportunity at the ballot. If you're not, then it's a different ballgame. Because I'm thinking, for example, Christian, you're Kenyan. We've had for the longest something we call Vision 2030. Or we've had parties give us manifestos, and it's all lip service. So just to poke holes of the thing, the idea of having ideologies, I think if we went that route, we would be leaving it to the whims of the leaders, because the ideology would have as well change mid-term, or when their term is coming to an end, as is the position in Guinea. The guy's term was coming to an end, and he decided to change the constitution, the law, and extend his term. And he'd say his ideology has not fully materialized. So for me, I think, because the question would be, how would you ensure or enforce this ideology within successive governments or within successive changes of leadership? So my thinking would be, if you're lucky enough, because also elections in Africa, to be specific, I think they're just an event. They don't really matter, because the leaders at the end of the day do what they want. But if you're lucky enough as a country to have elections that are free and fair and that actually matter in your country, then at that point in time is where you make a decision. Because at that point in time, you can tell, not with 100% certainty, but with a certain degree of certainty, whether or not this guy would be able to put in structures and systems, and when it's time to leave comes, he'd leave, and whether he'd make rational decisions based on factors such as economics and the law, as opposed to populism and what his cronies say and hangers on and such kind of things. So that would be my take on that.
Thanks for that, Chris. And I think to answer your question on how like the ideology would work, is that it's not a leader who defines it. It's a document that almost passed as a law. To give an example, not that I'm recommending, but just to give an example of where this happens, like China will add on their 13th 5-year plan, or that kind of thing, where it's a document which is not someone defining it. If it's the legislature who has to pass it, then they pass it where these are the projects that we are relying on, almost like a state department of something that deals with maybe development, where there's clarity on what needs to be done for the country, so that the same way that economic powers by the central bank or a reserve bank of a country do not depend on a leader, so that when someone comes in, they now change what economics defines. So it's that sort of thing, a predefined plan, which is possibly adopted maybe by legislature who should be representing the people. Prosper had asked you previously your comment on people believing also that leaders are appointed by God for them and you cannot question them. So even strengthening an institution, you literally say you should not touch them. So first there's a hindrance to even ever wanting that institution to be strengthened, because you're almost told you should accept it as it is. So I don't know what your opinion is on that. And then you can also give any other remarks that you have on this topic. Prosper, please.
Thank you, Christine. Well, I think the whole idea that leaders are basically ordained by God is an inherent African problem, so to speak. This isn't something that, like most of our problems, as we've said in previous episodes, that is a result of imperialism and colonialism, the thoughts that they brought to us. I can't speak about all of the African cultures across ethnic groups and across our diversity as African people, but I think a good number of them always had this belief. We had the divine right of kings ourselves. Our kings were never elected. We didn't have our system of governance wasn't this whole democracy, let's elect leaders thing that came with colonialism. We just had ruling people, ruling families who we believed at the time, because for the vast majority of let's call them states for lack of a better term, for political clarity. The vast majority of African ethnic groups, like I said, let's call them states. Basically, what made the institution of kings to endure was its alliance with the religious leaders, who then spoke to the people and made them believe that leaders are ordained by God. As such, if this family is ordained by God, the logic therefore follows that when whoever is in power dies, they leave it on to the next person within the family, and the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And I think, so that one is inherent. It's an inherent thing, which then creates an interesting problem. I'm glad you answered that question. It creates an interesting problem here, because not only do we now have a problem of trying to refine and modify the colonialist system and politics and ways of culture to suit us. The problem now grows to how then do we blend it to create a hybrid, but that still suits us. You remember in the first episode that I featured, we spoke about how African problems need African solutions, and instead of just taking whatever it is that colonialists left behind, we need to fix systems that suit us. But then it becomes a little bit tricky to then strike a fine balance between some of our own systems and beliefs and politics that had the most utility, and then to borrow the useful ones from the Westerners and then bring it together. But I think that's a problem that is inherent in us, which we then should then address to say, well, when we do civic education, like I said, there's some of the things that we should do. When we speak about civic education, we don't have to then also just uproot directly all elements of the civic education systems that we find in the West or anywhere else for that matter. It has to be something that suits us, that involves indigenous elements and probably other global elements that are particularly useful. And then the other thing that I want to speak about, I want to follow up on your example of China and ideology. China, since the rise of Chairman Mao, has always been led by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, their ideology on a general level up to this day is fundamentally socialist. Although for them to rise and become a superpower, especially after World War II, there's a time that they tried to become almost capitalist, but that was just so that they grow. But they're generally fundamentally socialist. So it really doesn't matter then, but for them, I think it works because of the one-party state. It really doesn't matter who is the particular president at that time. It matters that they are just following the particular socialist ideology, which is enshrined in two important documents in China: the Chinese Communist Party Constitution and the Chinese National Constitution, as they amend it from time to time, depending on the context. So this is why it's easy. So their socialist ideology basically is what the country is run on, regardless of who the president is. But as time goes on and they have to adapt, and somebody within the Chinese Communist Party comes up with fantastic ideas that basically are seen to have utility for the whole of China, and then it might be inculcated within both documents. For example, since the inception of the People's Republic of China and Maoism, Chairman Mao was the only person that was mentioned by name in both constitutions, the Chinese Communist Party's constitution and the Chinese government's constitution, until just recently when the current president, Xi Jinping, perfected something that he always used to speak about before he was actually the president, which they call Xi Jinping thought. So now they've added to Maoism what they call Xi Jinping thought. It's still fundamentally socialist, but it's something that helps them adapt and survive in a largely neoliberalist world with, I think, the corporatocrats winning anyway. So now you have in the Chinese Communist Party constitution, And in China's constitution, you have two people mentioned by name. You have Chairman Mao and you have Xi Jinping. But that's generally the idea when we speak about ideology. It doesn't have to be the Chinese model. It doesn't have to have people in it per se, because we don't want to run the risk of having cults and cultic personalities, like we were saying. It doesn't have to be a Mao thing or a Xi Jinping thing, but it just has to be fundamental ideas. Do you want to have more public institutions? Do you want to have exclusively public institutions, public hospitals, public schools, public transport system? Or do you want a blend of the public and the private? How far are you willing to regulate the private? Or do you want a completely free market, which they call capitalism? So everyone then who then comes just follows that. Do you want to be, if you are leftist, do you want to be social democrats? Do you want to be democratic socialist? Do you want to be whatever nuance it is? Do you want to be extremely right, or do you want to be extremely left? But when it becomes like that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who is in power. They might have their own nuances as a leader, but that are basically in the same line. We are still saying, as a country, we don't want private capital. We don't want private institutions. We want only public institutions, or we want a balance of both, but we're not going to heavily regulate the private, or we are going to heavily regulate the private. So nuances can come, but how a nation wants to be run is going to just basically, general idea is going to be there. And like, I want to agree with Christine when she says that can be reinforced by the very important documents that bring together institutions and the state. You have the constitutions, you have the subsidiary legislation, you have your policies at the executive level. But those things can be written and codified whenever there is need to. So nuances can basically be allowed, but we generally know as a people where we want to go and how we want to go about it.
Prosper, thanks for those comments, those thoughts. And I'm thinking actually, like Kenya, for instance, it's capitalistic, and this is something that everyone knows. It's not just as you're suggesting. We know that you are a private business, you can build it, and there are various laws. If it's even like protection of property within the constitution, to the commercial laws about government not taking property without compensating. Such things. I mean, they speak to capitalism all throughout different documents. So as the society, this is how we do things, especially from a business perspective. So it's that sort of thing. Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this and any concluding remarks that you may have on the topic.
Yes, just to pick up from this discussion where Prosper and you're advocating for probably having an ideology and preferably codified. And I beg to differ in terms of codification. I agree, maybe a country has a certain ideology. So we know Kenya is a capitalist state, we know China is a communist state, and so forth and so on. But in terms of codification, where I differ is in terms of we are in a system or we're in a country, on countries whereby respect for the law is not something mandatory in terms of our leaders either break the law or corrupt their way into breaking the law by probably bribing parliament, or just sometimes even using brute force in breaking that law. So codification really, in my opinion, is not the route to go. And also in terms of ideology, I think the same ideology, if you think about it keenly, it leads back to cultic leadership in terms of the ideology is set up by most probably the founding fathers of that nation. And speaking for Kenya, for example, when they were setting up, when they're coming up with this ideology, the general direction we want our country to be, they're not really taking in considerations such as economics or anything tangible. It was just based on what serves their best interest at that point in time. So, and having this in mind now, the question is, what would be my solution to this? And I think it's just a matter of setting up systems and structures in terms of not allowing somebody to be all arms of government, as you see in African states, and even in other states. Let's say, for example, in Afghanistan, what has happened is the system broke down. The Americans came in and said they want to do whatever they want to do, didn't set up any systems, ruled by brute force. Then they've left, and the next best thing in terms of the next powerful person, because a vacuum has to be filled. That was the Taliban. And you see in certain states, I was discussing with Christine the other day, the governors were actually handing over parties and handing over peacefully to the Taliban. And it's because the Taliban is the next best thing. But if you had systems and structures that are there in terms of not the law, but in terms of we do not allow a one-man show. We don't allow a one-man show. So if, for example, Kenya is, I can say it's pretty safe in terms of, we actually saw the other day the judiciary counter-checking the government and refusing their unconstitutional amendments to our constitution. So you see, in certain instances like that, there's somebody who can stand up to be counted and put in check this one-man show scenario, as opposed to, let's say, we say generally we are a capitalist state, fine, we codify it. So what if the government, a coup happens and an army comes in, like the case of Guinea, and they decide to suspend all laws and they do not respect any other law? So what happens in such instances? But if we have, let's say, a robust judiciary in Guinea, fine, it has suspended the local laws, but you know the international courts where you can take this matter up and prosecute. And so basically what I'm saying is we should not have a one-man show and have systems and structures where power is disseminated. Because these leaders come in and forget that they're actually fallible for some strange reason. People die, or coups are engineered by foreign countries. We have a scenario in Libya where the French engineered a coup. We have the scenario in Guinea, because Guinea is rich in iron and bauxite and such kinds of things. And the foreign countries have engineered a coup. So we cannot bury our heads in the sand and say such things that can't happen. We have that situation in Cameroon where Paul Biya is basically running a country remotely from outside the country. We have one of the countries here called Rwanda where, certain things like that. So we cannot bury our heads in the sand and say such leaders won't come or certain things won't happen. But I think if we try as much as possible and set up robust systems and structures, and it doesn't have to be government structures such as the judiciary. We can even have an active and robust civil space, and when there's somebody, it just needs a torch paper. If there's somebody who can stand up to be counted, we can stand up to this sort of cultic leadership, because codifying it fine on paper, it will look fine. Having ideology is fine, it will look fine. But picking up again on somebody talked about China, it's easy to have this ideology run through from the days of Chairman Mao to the current guy, because it's one and the same system. And if you think about it, it's sort of cultic. In what sort of society do we find a leader in the constitution, a leader in the school curriculum? So that is how they are able to enforce it up to now, because they have one ideology and it serves the leaders. But if they had a robust system disseminating power and certain kind of things, if one man or one sector of that system can stand up to be counted, and that, I think that would work as opposed to codifying it. But lastly, I would say let's not forget that speaking from an African perspective, the cultic leadership also can be misunderstood. Sometimes it's just genuine appreciation and love for the leader who's doing a good job. Because if you go back to countries like Libya, again, probably, I don't know if they're doctored, but reports we were getting from Libya before the leader was overthrown was that a majority of his citizens were pleased with how he's running the country. Also, reports we were getting from Zimbabwe, and people can confirm, I'm not sure, you guys can confirm, a huge chunk of people actually okay with what he was doing with regards to regaining back the lands from the white guys. And even in Kenya, currently we have such a situation whereby in Laikipia, there are tribal clashes and that kind of thing. And just let's not forget that sometimes people actually just genuinely appreciate how they're being ruled. So it's a case of, Mandela was once a terrorist as by some people, but to us he's one of the greatest leaders in the world. So it's just a bit of semantics at some point. Yeah.
It's almost like a moving target. But I think we should have a more in-depth discussion on one, the fact that who should define, like for instance, what is the right thing for Africa? Who says capitalism is what you should follow, or socialism, or communism, or dictatorship? Because in my view, should be look at what works for you and come up with a system. It could be a hybrid of whichever system, as long as you look and see this is where we want to go. This is like, for instance, economically, we don't want to be getting foreign aid of this much. We want to be self-funding. We need to get these things. Then you come up with a solution that works for you. But then also the second thing, and I think Chris, you've mentioned this, it or hinted to it, is that no country exists without the global, especially because of the global economy where we are all linked to each other. So that uh, there's going to be interference from someone who is not within that country because of the minerals that you have, because of any resources that they can get there. And there's also a lot of control that can come from outside that country. Like you cannot export your diamonds to whichever market because someone is unhappy about your human rights violations. And like there's a lot. So it's not just even you shaping your own ideology. There's someone almost outside there wanting to shape that ideology for you. I think we could have maybe a more discussion of what this ideology should be, if there should be. And of interest is that it's reported like one of the reasons for the coup in Guinea is because the people who carried out the coup felt like the current president violates human rights. So it's quite an interesting perspective because even if there were laws about human rights, someone can say, I feel like your version of human rights and what I consider is different, so I want to take power from you. So, quite some interesting thought there, and also about having institutions that work. What would that look like, and what institutions are we speaking about? I think we could have a follow up discussion on that. Prosper, if you could give your closing remarks, and then Chris give your closing remarks, and then we will end it there for tonight.
Thank you. I think Chris makes genuine, raised like genuine concerns. Very interesting argument. Like there's always a downside to everything, and to be honest, I must concede that it doesn't necessarily mean that if we go the way that I'm advocating for, and I should admit that it's probably vastly ideal, that we won't have the downsides. But I think at the end of the day, it's just about weighing your options. What is more advantageous than the other, and do the costs outweigh the benefits, or do the benefits outweigh the costs at the end of the day? Because realistically speaking, it doesn't matter what we decide to do in the end. Whatever it is that we decide to do is always going to have some costs. It will have some harms. We're not going to have something that is absolutely fantastic, and neither is it possible for us to have something which is absolutely terrible. But at the end of the day, whatever we choose should have its benefits outweighing its costs. So I think maybe if we get another opportunity to discuss this more, let's think along the lines. We need to be able to think, well, this that we're advocating for, how does it work for Africa? And probably the other thing that I want to say as we conclude is, when we speak about Africa and us doing things as Africans, do we think that it is possible for us to go to where, let's say, Colonel Gaddafi wanted us to go? Is it going to be possible for us to unite and become like a United States of Africa? If we do, what structures do we want? When we speak about African problems and we try to bring solutions, can we have like a one-size-fits-all solution? Is it possible to even have a blanket solution? Or regions are going to have to do it on their own, or individual states are going to? Because I think those are some of the things that we need to look at. I think I realize that normally as Africans, when we identify African problems, we tend to normally just talk about solutions without them thinking about whether they are pragmatic or not, like the practicality. So probably some of the things that we should consider. Should Africa say, okay, fine, we get it, let's all strive towards Colonel Gaddafi's philosophy, we need a United States of Africa. What is it going to be like? Is it going to be purely just economical, like the European Union? Like, how is it going to be politically? How is that going to work? And then maybe finally, the other thing that I wanted to speak about, and this goes to a direct comment about no state being able to live in a vacuum, especially as far as world trade goes. It's actually true, and I think generally why that's the biggest reason why Africa has problems. Should we have another episode? And please, let's do. I can't speak about it now since these are closing remarks. I want to speak about the United States government and the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II and the Washington Consensus at the end of the Cold War, things like that, and how them being able to control Britain with institutions, because they're basically based in the United States, and the United States government is basically a controlling member, even if it is a state. How aid and Africa's leaders' efforts to try to be in proximity with global trade is basically one of the things that is messing up our politics and hindering us trying to get African solutions for African problems. But yeah, so these are some of the things that I think we should carry over into the next discussion. But it's been fantastic. I'm glad that we had Chris on board. I'd never met him before, and really, really fantastic insights from Chris. I'd like to hear more from you. He's a fantastic guy. Thank you.
Your closing remarks, please.
Yes, Prosper, believe me, I would also like to have this discussion. Maybe we can have it offline. And maybe if the ladies allow, we can have it also online. But my closing remarks really would be, in summary, we as Africans should not also vilify ourselves. It's not as an isolated case whereby we're having this chaotic leadership in Africa only. It's all over the world. From the days of Mussolini, and the days of Hitler, from the Afghanistan situation. So all over the world, even India at some point, the Gandhi family was the only family ruling. There is light at the end of the tunnel. It's a matter of, and it will be painful, it will be a slow process, but it's a matter of setting up systems. Because systems and structures never die, but human beings are fallible. If the system and structures are there, then we are good. You might try fight systems and structures all you want, but they'll always win. For example, the situation in Burkina Faso, where there's one certain leader, I think it was Blaise. He murdered his friend from leadership, took over leadership for a long time, but the law still caught up with him. The system still caught up with him. So it's one of those things whereby we need to insist. And for those of us who are probably in the legal space, Prosper, you're in the human resource space, but you're passionate about certain things, I guess. We just push for systems and structures. The best you can. They'll always win. Because the sad case, or the beauty about Africa is we are rich in mostly minerals, human resource, and the quote unquote the powerful countries in the world will always want to have a hand from way back. And once they have a hand, they install somebody who comes in the populist agenda, and we build this cultic figure around them. And that's the sad fact. But we have our own internal systems. They'll always win. So I think that is what would be in summary.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And yes, we will have this follow-up discussion here on the platform, especially because these are very interesting things to speak about on like the situation of how we exist within this global economy and international trade. And because you've hinted to some of these things like foreign aid, and also maybe to speak about if, as Chris, you're saying, there has been such cultic leadership in these other countries, how is it that they have been able to build themselves? What are the steps that they have taken? And then we can possibly have a comparative and see what we can borrow from that. But thanks a lot, guys, for coming by tonight. We always appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts. Very good insight. So for now, from us, we say thank you, and we will have the follow-up discussion. Thank you.